Blue Flu in chat asks, what are your thoughts on the fracture expanding or convergence from multiple areas that find its way to make it to more bigger fractures in the map within the storm when it's coming?
So I think that I actually think it'll be very interesting to see what happens with the fracture and expanding over time, because we do know that that is a thing. Because the fracture is new, and this entire chapter has been about kind of digging into the spell storms, digging into the fracture, and trying to figure out how to stop that chaos from expanding. I think it is highly likely that you will see more and more changes to the map as a result of this information.
In chat from Blue Flu, they asked about designing gauntlets, which you talked about earlier, talking about new gauntlets and everything. But one thing that they specifically mentioned was what type of process do you go through to find out how, like, where you think a projectile is fun enough and unique enough to use, just because they can't even imagine like trying to design fun and satisfying projectiles.
A lot of it is mostly around approachability at first. So like we have a wide enough development team at this stage where a person comes with an idea, and what will happen is they will prototype it until they feel like, oh, this more or less represents the idea that I believe in and I care about. Then from there we have a bunch of internal play days with it, and at that point in time you try to pay attention to everyone who's never seen the projectile before, because like most people, like the thing about doing internal playtests is that you do have a captive audience because you work with these people and you don't want to tell them their ideas are bad. So you're generally going to end up in a place where people are willing to, or they're going to tell you, hey, I really like this, or I found it useful for this reason. Like the feedback you really want to pay the most attention to in general are people who are just like, I didn't know why I would use this over X, or I didn't know why I would use this over Y. And that's when you really have to be kind of like very, very honest about, do I need to change this at all, or is this just this one person? Once you finish going through that side of the process, you then eventually start to move towards the side where you are, you're demoing it and showcasing it to players. And that's a little bit longer, because generally speaking, things should be a bit more polished then. You normally don't show players stuff that's completely and utterly placeholder. So at that point, you've sunk time and energy into it, even from like an art side perspective. Because like normally when you're actually prototyping something, you're normally doing a lot of placeholder stuff. Like for the longest time, actually, just for reference, when we first put Spellbreak out in alpha, we had it such that we had a character called Blockman. And I think actually there's still some images of Blockman around if you dig far enough into the archives. But he was so obviously placeholder that no one would be convinced that the game was in a different state than it actually was. And typically when you're prototyping, that's what you're doing. You're using a lot of placeholdery art just in order to be able to iterate very rapidly. Mm-hmm. And this also means you're writing a check for yourself, because in the future, it means that if a person doesn't understand something right then, you're just going to have to assume that they'll understand it better when you actually put real art in, as an example. So like, let's say for instance, you were going to do something, I'm trying to think of a good example, like a magma gauntlet, right? And as a result of a magma gauntlet, you're shooting out these spherical orbs at people, and what happens is when they hit the ground, they splatter, but they don't really splatter in a way that's easy to follow. The orb flattens into a big giant disc. Most people would be like, I don't understand why this gauntlet works this way. And at that point, you have to basically, within reasonable doubt, be able to recognize that, in the future, art is going to have to solve this problem. And all the artists know about it. They'll have to do a bunch of concept art, all that work. I don't know. Hopefully that answers some of the question, because it's actually like making gauntlets are actually one of the hardest things to do in for Spellbreak. I would argue they're harder than runes, and runes themselves are pretty difficult.
I feel like that conversation, I mean, I did a lot of freelancing in my college days, and like we always have those conversations. Well, that doesn't look like that. I've told you several times.
About potions, what is the data like of people's use of knowledge potion? Personally, they love the idea of gameplay affecting potions, but obviously not if it was like in a competitive setting. Mm-hmm. So if the data shows that it's liked a lot, what are your thoughts on smaller type potions that affect just flat stats, such as like 5+ speed, or for 20 seconds, something like that?
Interesting. So I would definitely say I don't know that we have enough data to conclusively to conclusively go one way or the other for those. And I say that not because of the fact that people aren't using them. Like, far from it, a lot of people are using them. But the difference is it's hard to separate a skilled usage of a potion from a non-skilled usage of a potion. You know, so like, for instance, if sometimes a person just picks up a potion, they'll just drink it right away. But on the other hand, a person who's actually drinking it while in combat, they're clearly doing something. They're clearly doing something at a higher tier of skill than a standard person, and I think that's where the data from. So, I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer, but I feel like that's the type of stuff we're still in the process of looking at.
Also, like, more variables make for more balancing. So
There was another question in chat asking if you were planning on adding any situational dialogue to the characters, like spoken dialogue when they get hit, when the storm is closing, things like that.
Oh, interesting. Actually, just something we've been looking into. We actually want to try to give a narrator voice to what's happening in the game. Like, it wouldn't be for the characters. It would be much more for like the situation. So imagine where we're like, Avira is actually commenting on your performance, and you know, she's trying to be as nice to you as possible, but chances are she might say some things that might be tough love.
Another question about how does Proletariat feel about artifacts? Personally, as a community member, they often see a lot of people decide not to use artifacts because of how far back it is from the player. Is there any talk on revisiting how artifacts are placed, or is Proletariat satisfied with how it is currently?
I would say that at least right now, we're pretty okay with how they are currently, but we've been experimenting a lot with artifacts in terms of size and occlusion, kind of things along those lines. Because if you put them too far back, they actually start sliding through walls, and you definitely don't want that.
Another couple questions from chat here. I'll try to paraphrase a little bit. Do you have any, or has there been any talk about making the winning scene any spicier in your game? Like just, you know, the final shot moment where you're the last player, last squad left. Has there been any talk about spicing that up in Spellbreak? And also, has there been any talk about adding a kill cam?
We have talked about having a kill cam. Generally speaking, we have not talked that much about the final, like the final team, but we are trying to find other ways in which we can kind of like basically spice up moments in the game, up to and including even like getting something, unlocking something from a quest. Like there's not a lot of fanfare there in terms of like celebratory moments, and that is one of those things that we do think, you know, we just need to do a better job at. In terms of kill cams, yes, we have talked about that, but trying to do it, we basically balked at the cost of trying to build it, because it's so difficult to be able to actually get a kill cam to work with just how we've built the game. But we would love to, because I actually think a kill cam would be a great addition. Because I don't know about you, but there are lots of times when you die and it's just like, how? Like, I just want to know exactly how I died, and you really can't tell because you don't have a kill cam.
yeah, but people still want to call. Like, how did I die? And you see the cam. That's bullshit. I just disagree with that kill cam. That's not how I died.
That's a good point, actually, because people will still disagree with their kill cam regardless.
The one thing I've learned about game development is like usually the loudest people are the smallest user base. the loud.
Another interesting question. Have you had any thoughts on adding more complex objectives to the map? Maybe something with themed monsters or mini bosses that drop rare loot, or structures that could be controlled for intel, etc.
Yes, it's a very good question, and that is something we have given a lot of thought to. Right now, like we are trying to make sure that the gameplay as a whole stays interesting. So our standard for adding things like that is fairly high, because we wouldn't want to just be like a sack of hit points that isn't doing very much. But yeah, like, that is definitely something we are interested in doing. Like, we actually want this. We want Spellbreak to feel more and more like a world over time. And the best ways of doing that is to add living things to it, or things that at least are moving if they're not alive, as the case would go.
Yeah, it's just like the groundwork is there, and now you're gonna worry about the fine tuning, and then once that's in a better place, you guys can focus on the fun, like superfluous stuff, like having NPCs that you know on the map, or weather, or map objectives, that different modes, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
One question is, any plans for making the character walk over small objects so they can enter doors without jumping those few inches? And the second question from the same user, Sakadex, is, do you have any plans on adding music for the dancing emotes?
So yes, we do have plans on adding music for the dancing emotes. I can answer that. I can answer that one fairly authoritatively. In terms of actually the weird step height things, those are like you actually do have the ability to step up over things. I just think those are bugs, and they're bugs that are driven. They're just bugs that we need to fix. Kind of goes back to what I was saying before around of making sure your core gameplay loop is very tight. Like nothing's more annoying than walking over to a set of stairs that just based off of step up height you don't walk up. Like stairs exist for you to walk up, and when you can't walk upstairs, something feels bad. And I feel similarly are outdoors. So yes, that is a clear set of bugs that we need to fix.
How long are we slated for you?
Another question from chat: is there any plan to revisit some of the emotes in order to make them looping, like the clapping emote, for instance?
Oh, that's a good one, actually. Yeah, that's actually that's a good call, actually. I am not certain. I would have to actually dig around to find the answer for that one, sadly. But that's a very good idea because yes, that's a very good idea, and that's something we should do. And especially for anyone who already has those emotes, because I do feel like for the most part, people just want to be able to loop them, even if it's to mock their opponent.
For the thing,
right.
Blue Flu asked, is there any talk to drop variety? A lot of to drop a variety. A lot of people seem to have problems, especially with story quests that land in specific locations.
Yes, yeah, I can definitely say that has been something we've talked about internally as well. I mean, for our first chapter, we've learned a lot of lessons. Some of them have been painful. Some of them have been illustrative. We actually want to. You would expect that our next chapter will be significantly better about that, because I do agree. It feels bad to have a quest that RNG determines you just can't do when you first jump into a match. Like I'd far rather it be. I'd far rather there be gameplay reasons as to why I don't succeed at something than just being like there was never an option to drop in this location, so it simply was not possible. So yes, I can definitely say that is something